Hello, and welcome everyone to this new edition of the EURA Summer School on the Regulation of Robotics and Artificial Intelligence. It's a great pleasure to have many of you here and many other connected over the internet. These 2 years of pandemics have taught us to be very innovative in the way we conceive and deliver our courses, our events, and this really allows us to bring people together from literally all over the world. So before getting started with today's event, which will be a conference that brings together people from academia as well as policymaking on the most current debates around AI regulation occurring in Europe, we would have a few words of welcome to you from the director of our department, that is of the Department of Law and Political Sciences, of the Scuola Superiore di Sant'Anna, Professor Morgante. She's a full professor of criminal law. I don't know if she's online because she's traveling, so if she manages to connect, that would be great. Is she there? Okay. Professor Morgante is online. Can she speak or? Oh. Buongiorno. We're just welcoming Professor Carrozza, who just joined us. Yes, take a seat for a moment, thank you. Okay, so I imagine that Professor Morgante cannot connect, so she just sent me a few words of to greet you and welcome you all. I'll just read the document that she sent me, and this is what she writes. She says, "Welcome to Sant'Anna and the Dear Policy Institute. It's a pleasure for me in my role of Director of the Institute of Law, Politics and Development to open the Summer School on the Regulation of Robotics and AI in Europe. The Summer School is organized as a framework of the EURA Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, a success story of research, education and third mission of the Dear Policy Institute, where thanks to the idea and the hard work of the colleague Andrea Bertolini, we can offer a center of competence and knowledge on robotics and AI, focusing on their ethical, legal, social, and economic implications. The activities of the EURA Center perfectly represent the missions of the Dear Policy Institute and of the Scuola, promoting innovative, multidisciplinary research, offering advanced educational programs, stimulating the dialogue with policymakers in the perspective of legal and political advocacy, increasing social awareness, promoting an informed debate, and reducing the digital competence and knowledge divide on technology for a more inclusive society. The projects on the regulation of robotics, technologies, and AI started more than 15 years ago with the RoboLaw project, again developed by Andrea Bertolini in the forward-looking awareness of the necessity of a strong interaction between technology and law. This idea, after almost 20 years, is even more cutting edge. The historical moment we are experiencing needs the creation of a multidisciplinary community and an advanced academic debate to identify relevant social and policy issues and to maintain the technology always human-centered. I'm confident you will take this opportunity, starting from this opening debate involving the most important experts, institutional representatives, and stakeholders. I am on the road on this moment, and this is the reason why I'm reading this out, but I hope to meet you later on lunch in Pisa. Have a fruitful summer school, and let me leave the floor to my colleague. So, I virtually thank Gaetana for these very kind words I have read for the first time, and it was quite embarrassing because they were talking about me. But it's really very much a pleasure to have you all here. So before leaving the floor to Professor Carrozza, I have just a very short presentation to introduce you all to one another and basically to say a few words about EURA, our Center of Excellence, that you might already be aware of. So just some info. As it was already mentioned in Professor Morgante's speech, which I read out, EURA is the purport of a very long research activity that first of all started with the project RoboLaw back in 2012. RoboLaw was the first European-funded project to address the ethical, legal, and economic implications of advanced robotic technologies. Back then, the focus was on robotics. We'll discuss at length what, if there is, and what it entails to differentiate robotics from AI. And it's a quite complicated issue, but yes, there was where the debate had started around robotics regulation. And all that competence, all that knowledge was then put into this center of excellence that is funded through the Jean Monnet Action directly by the European Commission and is currently the only one in Europe dealing with technology regulation. What is the purpose of this summer school? The purpose of this summer school is to train you into thinking in this multidisciplinary way, which is very much required in order to understand the challenges of technology regulation and the emergence of new technologies in our society. Lawyers need to get some understanding of engineering. Engineers need to understand the language of lawyers and the implications of their research. Over the years, we had people coming from the most diverse fields that join us in this effort, both as students and as teachers. And at times, some of our students then became later on our teachers and speakers at our conferences. So this is also a community building effort of people that are interested in this very complex domain. And of course, once you acquire this critical understanding, that you can bring it to your research, you can bring it to the development of new technologies, or you can also bring it into consulting. We do ourselves a lot of consulting, primarily for European institutions. So we will address a broad range of topics. You have received a detailed program in your welcome package, and this splits into law quite a bit, but less than half, and also economics, management, and robotics, and ethics. So you'll learn about many different perspectives that all need to sum up. This is the calendar that you already have printed out, so I won't comment on that very much. There is also a little exam at the very end, but that's not intended to be anything stressful or a reason for concern. It's a tool to let you think over the things we'll be discussing over the week and to try to focus on some very essential take-home ideas that we would like you to have clear by the end of the course. And well, we have a huge range of speakers coming, of course, from Sant'Anna, from the different departments, including the Biorobotics Institute, the TechChip Institute, that are the two engineering departments here at the Scuola, but also from the Institute of Management and Economics, and of course our Dear Polis Institute, but we also have people from the University of Vienna, the London School of Economics, Munich University, and so on and so forth. So it's a very broad community of scholars, a European community of scholars that come from very different backgrounds, and for many years now have been working together. How is our class composed? This is also very interesting. This year we have a majority of lawyers. It's not always the case, but this year we have like 3/4 of our class that are lawyers, but we also have people with a background in philosophy and ethics, as well as computer science. So we also had anthropologists in the past years, and we had people from very different domains. And this is a very interesting part for us. It's a learning experience on our side as well. And this, what we like to do is build a community of people that will stay in touch. And I hope this will be the case also with you. And in terms of professions, we have a stronghold of PhD and researchers, so a strong academic community, but we also have lawyers, legal counsels, and judges, as well as other professionals coming from consultancy, as well as councils in telecommunications, and so on and so forth. So in terms of nationality, it's again, we're less than half Italians, which is always good. We have people from Spain, Brazil, Poland, Turkey, Slovakia, El Salvador, Colombia, and Japan. Not all here present, but in this mixed reality world, some of you are actually virtually here, but we will try to make their experience back at home as in present as possible. It's a pity we cannot have meals together or drinks like we typically have in the evenings, but besides that, we'll try to make this hybrid experience as smooth and as pleasant for all of you. Those that are here physically in Pisa, getting the heat and the mosquitoes, and those that are maybe in a cooler place back at home without the possibility of enjoying the beautiful Pisa Tower and our university. So I will I'll leave it here. I thank you for this, for your attention. I thank you for choosing us. I thank you for being here with us today. And now I'll leave the floor to Professor Carrozza. She's our first speaker for today. Giving a presentation of Professor Carrozza is impossible because she did everything, and she really represents the sum, the algebraic sum of all we ever tried to do here at EURA, because she has a background as a leading engineer worldwide. She is currently a scientist leading the CNR, the most important research institution in Italy, but she also was a Minister of Education, so she has an understanding of policy making as well as hard sciences. So without any further ado, I leave the floor to Professor Carrozza.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and good morning, everybody. I don't know if my slides are here.
This is the... Just
Okay, so you see the slides. Okay, so good morning. My name is Maria Chiara Carrozza. I hope you see my slides, and I will speak about robotics and artificial intelligence in the framework of the new scenario for research, fundamental research and translational research in the future. So I'm currently president of the National Research Council in Italy, which is the largest public research institution. So I have a perspective which is larger than before. I have been researcher in robotics for many, many years, and my field of expertise is neurorobotics and cybernetic hands and exoskeletons. So I'm supposed to be an expert of neurorobotics. So I will try to explain what we are doing, because I think that the scenario for research and the framework and the background is different since last year, for example, when I spoke at the same summer school, because many things are happening in European Union programs and similar. Then I will try to explain robotics and artificial intelligence and in general enabling technologies and the need for regulation and ethical approach. And one question which is good for you, I think, in this summer school, because for speaking about regulation and for robotics and AI, is research making an impact around the world? This is the main point, because regulating is good, but also we have to design regulation and regulatory issues and new acts and laws in order to enable and encourage innovation and to make an impact in the good way, of course. And this is an ethical question, and for me it's important to understand what making an impact means. And I have been chair for an expert group in developing a methodologies for assessing partnership at the European level, and we delivered a large report and scheme for assessing the impact of partnership. Partnership is one of the most relevant programs in European Union program. It is 30% of the budget, so it's a relevant program, and it's important to understand what is the impact that we expect for research. And then the twin transitions are relevant for developing the enabling technologies, so the twin transition and the mega trends for fundamental and translational research. And in particular, the National Research Council in Italy decided to start up a new Center for National Future Biodiversity. That means we invested our efforts for starting up a new center for monitoring and developing biodiversity research. So I try to go fast and open for questions for also interacting with you and understanding how I can help you in understanding better how to develop regulatory issues for robotics. So the future of science and research, to me, this is an example of biological object looking for a new shell for finding a house and finding a plastic shell and being stuck with the head in the plastic shell. And this is an example of our world today. So research stuck and humanity stuck, and we have to remove our cap and find a good shell and natural shell in order to develop our environment. And for doing that, we have to think about our mission to perform fundamental research, to perform translational research, to encourage industrial leadership, and to develop social and industrial innovation, and to match sustainable and address sustainable development goals and the twin transitions. So that means that these are the list of objectives for research and innovation. So I think that it's important in developing regulatory issues and framework to understand that we have to encourage all these objectives in research. That must not be undergoing any problems in finding rules that are not necessary. So rules are something that are encouraging this development. And in this time, we are living three main problems. First of all, we are developing the Horizon Europe and the National Research and Infrastructure Plan. Then we have the National Resilience and Recovery Plan, which is fundamental. So research is addressing resilience and recovery after pandemic. And third, in this parallel processes, we have also the reform plan for CNR, because research must be reformed according to the new objectives, new missions, new framework. So in your role and what you are studying in this summer school is fundamental in order to understand how to encourage this reforms plan. This is in Italian Research Council, of course, but in many, many other research institutions, they are addressing the similar missions to match the European program, to match the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, and then, in addition, to reform the institution in order to address. Now, CNR in Italy, we have more than 200 branch offices, and we have a very good gender balance, not in the highest level of the career, and 88 institutes and 7 departments. And this is only to say that we have to understand that today research is based on researchers, but also on research technologies, because today is the time of research infrastructures. No infrastructures, no research. So my message, the second message, is that to understand that research infrastructures and large network of infrastructures and cooperation among different nodes of research infrastructure is something which is fundamental in order to reach ethics and also addressing sustainable goal development. So we have to understand how to encourage this network of infrastructures and how to encourage new professions that are emerging in parallel with researchers. We have many people dedicated to data, for example, collecting data from different instruments for monitoring the environment, for monitoring health care, for monitoring the territory. So we have to understand that there is this new career in our field, a new way of reorganizing research, because entering in the infrastructure means to open access and fight against inequalities. So in the large research institutions, we have infrastructure. We have people who is research performing. We have infrastructures. We have industries in joint labs and joint infrastructures, but also services. We are doing a lot of research in collaboration with public administration, because research, one of the objectives of research today is to give competences, to give infrastructures, laboratories, areas for innovating public administration. For example, in monitoring plant diseases like Xylella fastidiosa, that in the south is terrible in Puglia, in Italy, we are organizing structures for monitoring plant epidemic and pandemic, and we are organizing area for monitoring the territory, the climate change, and many, many things in collaboration with public administration. So today we have a new important and emergent area for research and innovation to collaborate and stimulate and encourage the innovation in public administration. And then infrastructure are fundamental. This is a new oceanographic vessel that we have recently received from an oceanographic institution in the US. It's a donation of a new vessel which is fundamental in order to explore the ocean, especially the Mediterranean Sea. Without this vessel, research is not able to produce enough data and infrastructures for monitoring the status of our Mediterranean Sea. So that is, and to manage such kind of large vessels like Gaia Blue is really something which is important, and also it's very difficult and critical for a research institution, because we need new skills, even the skill for driving the boat and for keeping and the maintenance of infrastructures. And so this is a message for understanding that today research needs new skills, new competences, and new activities in order to be productive. So research infrastructure in Europe are organized into the S3 roadmap, and it's very complex. And we have infrastructure from human sciences, social sciences, healthcare, robotics, artificial intelligence, and those infrastructures are the way for enabling the access to data. And the access to data is something which is strongly related to democracy and ethics, because if we produce the access to those data, we produce the access to citizens to the data that we are producing and to the real conditions of our environment, for example, or healthcare status or similar. So I want to go only to show to you something that is important. So because robotics and artificial intelligence and the other data science and big data and all the enabling technologies are fundamental for large projects addressing the problems of the planet and environmental and, for example, precision medicine, microplastic, and deep decarbonization. So what I want to say is only that it's important to understand how robotics and artificial intelligence are used in different contexts, which can be very, very various and diverse. So it's important to understand that the technologies can be specialized and used in different environments, and we have to understand how and the ethical implications and also the human rights implications that we have and we find in the different contexts where we are studying. So we are addressing the problem of inequalities, and research must address these problems, and regulatory issues must be a tool for reduce inequalities. For me, this is my objective and personal mission, so I want to share with you this. And what I want to say, robotics and artificial intelligence. Today, I think it's not possible to think to fundamental research without thinking also to the application and finalization of the different technologies. So we are speaking about digitalization and sustainability, urban intelligence, energy and climate change. So our department are addressing all these issues with several large interdisciplinary projects. Our strategy for artificial intelligence, we are focusing in research, application, and also higher education. So our objective is to develop human-centered, trustworthy, and sustainable artificial intelligence. And for that reason, we developed several areas: machine learning, computer vision, natural language processing, and so on. So we are developing different areas where we are focusing on different subjects. And we have also fundamental research, for example, in natural language processing, which is fundamental as an enabling technology, but also we have some challenge-driven artificial intelligence research in Industry 4.0 or in environment and agriculture and life science. So we have today submitted one of the largest projects in Italy on artificial intelligence. We are coordinating this future artificial intelligence research, which is aimed at organizing a large partnership of research institutions and companies addressed at developing, and the name of the project is FAIR. Which is Future Artificial Intelligence Research. So interacting and collaborating with humans, evolving, perceiving and acting with evolving context, and being aware of their own limitations and able to adapt to new situations and interact appropriately in complex and social settings and so on. So we are developing something which is a bit top-down, giving some ethical framework, and then developing the fundamental research which is necessary. So we have some focus on human and society, robustness, sustainability, and then we have some transversal projects: legal and ethical design of trustworthy AI system, vision, language, and multimodal challenges, and so on. And I don't have the time to read everything, but you can see here the main issue: human-centered AI, integrative AI, so bridge across the different AI methods, resilient AI, adaptive AI, high-quality AI, symbiotic AI, edge and exascale AI, pervasive AI, and green-aware AI. So these are the issues that are in the, transversal and in the different areas of research. And so this is the partnership integrating many companies and universities. This is something which is for the moment, it's a proposal, so we are waiting for the evaluation. But in general, we have this tradition of coordinating AI project at CNR, especially here in Pisa, close to Scuola Sant'Anna. There are the main institutes which are the main character in organizing that. Then there is robotics. Robotics in Italy, we have this large group of people working together in different institutions for developing robotics and intelligent machine. And here you have the new taxonomy for this Institute for Robotics and Intelligent Machine. So what is interesting is that today in Italy and in many countries, we are organizing large virtual institutes for encouraging partnership and also infrastructure development for addressing the main issues. So for example, robotics and intelligent machine in hostile and unstructured environment, or robotics and intelligence machine for Industry 4.0, and robotics and intelligent machine for inspection and maintenance of infrastructure, and so on. So we are organizing, I can say, taxonomy and group of interest and trying to put together people, because as I said before, it's fundamental to develop infrastructure for addressing this big problem. And these are some examples of what we are doing from marine robotics or studying and development drones and robots, teams of robots for exploration in hostile fields, in unstructured environments, open-ended learning robots for exploring and moving around in the environment, in the house environment, and also in advanced manufacturing or in collaborative robotics and so on. I cannot enter in all details, but what I want to say is that there are many areas where we can develop and speak about robots. And when we are wondering what is the definition of robots, sometimes some roboticists are saying robots are artificial intelligence with a body. Okay, so the robots are seen as an extension of the artificial intelligence system with a body. So the problem is matching the artificial intelligence or synthetic intelligence with a body, offering a large opportunity of developing the intelligence system thanks to the body and to the machine and also the motor intelligence, the kinesthetic intelligence and so on. So for me, the robots and the body is before the intelligence. So the intelligence behavior is developing according to the body that is interacting with the environment. So when you enter in this loop, what is artificial intelligence, what is robotics, you can discuss for hours, but it's interesting that the two fields are connected and not evolving at the same time, because we have many techniques, many areas in artificial intelligence not really related to the body, especially based on data and collection of data, and then the issue is the quality of data that you are dealing with. But if you enter in an intelligent agent, you have to deal with the body of the robot, and today the body of the robot still needs a lot of research in order to be developed. And so I don't enter in that, but it's important to understand that today the two areas are evolving together, and there is room for research in both the two areas, but especially in robotics for what concerns materials, sustainability, circularity of the robot body development, and so on. We still need a lot of research, especially for what concerns energy. So, of course, agriculture is reaching a lot of attention, because today production and also the need for water in Italy is really an emergency. You know that in the north of Italy, we have really shortage of water available for cultivation and agriculture. So precision agriculture, it will be fundamental and enabling technology. When I was a researcher, this was not perceived as something very fundamental. Today, precision agriculture and matching with the shortage of water is fundamental for future. So, I think that we can do a lot of things for healthcare and wellness, going from assistance and personal assistance and care in hospitals and in healthcare facilities to digital therapies. I think digital therapies is the frontier of the development of artificial intelligence for assisting chronic patients. So I think this will be something that we have to study and also to encourage, because digital therapies, so the therapy is based on algorithms, on application, on coaching of the patient, will be fundamental for our future. I think I can go to the final part. Impact. I want to stimulate your attention on the impact of research, because what I showed before is something which is interesting, opening new perspective, fascinating, but what is the real impact, for example, of medical robotics today? If we go to the surgery, we had an impact. For example, the Leonardo da Vinci robot in surgery has an impact, but only in a small part of the world, because around the world the Da Vinci robot is not so used as we can expect. And so we have to measure the impact, because I don't think we can develop regulatory issues and also meditation and research on law, on ethics, without thinking to the real impact and concrete impact of research in our life. So for the moment, the only robot which had an impact in everyday life is the Roomba robot that we have at home, cleaning the environment. And we don't have many robots at home. So The impact is expected, and we have to focus our effort in order to develop that. Not thinking that we need only technology transfer. We need fundamental research because we need redundancy, resilience, we need trustworthy systems, and the Roomba robot is safe, secure. Secure, I am not sure, because it can be connected with the internet, and I'm not sure that is so secure, but it's reliable, and it's cheap. It's available, so people can buy it. So I don't see many robots in these conditions. So we have a very specialized and expensive robots in the surgical room. Then we have a simple robot at home. In the middle, we have an entire territory where we are developing expectations, but we are not sure of the impact that we will have. So I want to think about that. And then, to make an impact, for example, the resilience and recovery plan in Europe, and then in Italy and in other countries is fundamental. So, for example, in Italy, there is a large effort in order to match digitalization, innovation, green revolution, infrastructure, education and research, inclusion, health. So there are specific programs for addressing the impact. And we have a short time in order to demonstrate that what we are developing is really having an impact on our life, and also to develop a methodology for assessing that. New indicators, qualitative assessment, subjective assessment, for example, engaging researchers, engaging citizens in evaluating and assessing the impact of research that we are developing. So I think I can stop for the moment and asking to you questions, so we can discuss a little bit about what I said before. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Carrozza. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. Don't be shy. Yes. Wait a second. The microphone, otherwise they won't hear us.
I can stay here, so I can...
Thank you. My name is Rogelio, and I wanted to ask, you mentioned about the infrastructure. I know that Italy is making a big effort, that in Bologna is creating a massive center of processing. But together with that, are there any elements to also attract talent and attract people who can make the most of it?
So the question is about research infrastructures, what we are doing.
Yeah, what is being done to attract and retain talent, people?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that research infrastructure is the challenge of today. In our recovery and resilience plan, we have a lot of projects in that area. And CNR, the institution where I am president, we are coordinating several of these infrastructures. So the point is that to collect and interact with different research institutions, to deploy different nodes in an area, for example, in environmental monitoring, for example, monitoring the CO2 in atmosphere. We need many antennas and systems deployed in the territory. We need a digital infrastructure to collect data, and we need technology people dedicated to collect data, analyze data, prepare the quality of data, and then put everything together accessible for the open science system. So it's fundamental that we have talents dedicated to that, and also engineers who thinks that doing this is something that is really necessary. It's like preparing the mission to Mars or to the moon. So if we want to make the difference, we need not only one system for detecting CO2 here in Pisa or in Rome. We need a large distribution of nodes, complex modeling systems, data accessible, so people can go online and see how is the CO2 on the Alps or in the south, on the islands or everywhere. And we need that this system is open for connection with France, Germany, Switzerland, South Africa, South America, because we need this kind of system. And if we don't do that, we are not ethical, because we know that we need to monitor the environment everywhere in a scientific way. So the scientific method is based on the possibility to have these talents working on that. So it's a new way of thinking to research and innovation infrastructure. It's fundamental for me.
Any other questions? Yes.
Okay. So you mentioned that philosophers and people who are keen on AI ethics are also involved in your research. So my question was, in which part of the research are they most useful, let's say? Is it like on a first background and assessing, let's say, the scope of the research, or throughout, or at the end, or whether at any point even? This is because I think that in Italy we're still lacking a bit a sort of awareness on the importance of also having ethicists and philosophers on board. So knowing about your experience would help me, let's say, in advocating more for my position. Thank you.
I think that today is not time for awareness, it's time for working together. So basically, I don't like very much people thinking or speaking without being involved in the process. So I think that scientists working in artificial intelligence today must cooperate in designing system ethical by design. So that means to think together with specialized people. So I think that philosophers, historians, people in human science are fundamental, but we need both. We need people thinking about the future and understanding the impact on the society of these technologies and also figuring out the future, but we need also that some of them become specialists and enter in the process of designing and developing new tools for artificial intelligence. So I think we need both the approach. But today is time to be more concrete and to demonstrate that this interaction is really at the beginning and the fundamental development of the process. I don't know if I answered to your question. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much presentation. And my name is Sanem, Sabire Sanem Yılmaz in Turkey. And I worked robot law and GDPR and privacy law. And I asked question, what do you think about the regulation, all regulation? Is it enough to work area? And have you any opinion for CNR and any opinion to European Council or HIPAA? Yeah, it's now I ask questions.
It's a very challenging question, as the questions that I received before, in the sense that I think GDPR was important in order to make a change of mind in our system. So we focused, for example, in data center located in Europe and not in different countries, and the sense that data are relevant. So GDPR has this, I think, this merit to put the attention on what we are doing, where are coming from data, and where we are collecting and storing data, and also many, many issues. So what we have to do is to avoid that this becomes some bureaucratic engagement of institutions. They develop data responsible for DPO or similar, and then it's a sort of including another step in checking things as something which is bureaucratic and not concrete. So we have to evolve regulation also because this is a very fast evolving area. So we cannot think that a regulatory system can stand without feedback on the results. So I am for impact measurement. So when we develop a reform, we also have to first anticipate the expected impact that we are, but also monitoring the implementation of reform and also monitoring the impact of reform. So there should be something that we can adjust and improve in order to avoid the decay towards bureaucratic and then go to the essential, because today is not the same system as 5 years ago, for example. The landscape changed very much. So I encourage to go back and try to think if there is something that we can adjust.
Any other questions? So I think I wanted to add a comment that goes a little bit along the lines of what has been asked and said, and once more thank Professor Carrozza for being here with us and for the things she told us. But really, you can see that even nowadays, joint efforts between engineers, technicians, lawyers, ethicists, and philosophers, economists are becoming the rule, the normal condition. Just these days, there is a new PhD program in engineering that is being started in Italy that is a national program in engineering, and it brings together engineers working in robotics and AI from the most diverse fields. And this project also brought together lawyers, including myself. So nowadays, in a PhD program in engineering, you will have legal scholars and a professor of ethics that are part to the program, and there are teachers in the program as any other engineering professor, which is something that was unthinkable just a few years back when we started. So, with the center, we participate in a number of European projects developing advanced technologies, and we study along with the technological development the ways these the implication of these technologies and the problems they might give rise to and how these things needs to be addressed. So this is very much something that is happening today, this effort to develop a common understanding and a multidisciplinary approach. One very relevant point that I think needs to be addressed is how to bring technology to the market, in the sense that we saw from Professor Carrozza's presentation there is a lot of research, but the next challenge is to turn those prototypes into products that reach the market. And that's not an obvious question. And that also has a lot to do with technology regulation. And this is more or less the perspective we will study technology regulation during this entire week, because it's very fundamental, of course, to do the research in order to develop the technology, but then also it is necessary to have the right framework to allow for the emergence of the technology and for the technology to reach the market in a way that is respectful of our fundamental rights and values, but that is also economically sustainable. So balancing these opposing things is very complex. And now, really picking up on what we just said, I would like to introduce the next speaker for today morning. That is David Raichel, Dr. David Raichel, that he is connected online with us because unfortunately he couldn't personally join this event. I met David in Venice a few months back in a very relevant program event dealing with various aspects of technology regulation. And David works for the European Commission, and more precisely, he works for the unit of the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. And there he is responsible for managing research projects in area relating to AI and advanced technologies. And he's very much involved in this very complicated aspect, which is the ethical assessment of advanced technologies and AI. It's very complicated because this is something that is of increasing importance. We saw it being expressly recalled by the final document prepared by the high-level expert group on AI, the so-called Altai questionnaire. Many of you will probably have heard of it. By the end of this week, all of you will have heard of that. And not just that, but also more recently the AI Act also touches upon the need to assess the compliance with fundamental rights of advanced technologies, and this is extremely complicated. I met David precisely in an event in Venice where we were discussing how that can be tackled, how that can be done, because lawyers have very little idea. The ethical assessment or the fundamental right assessment is always related primarily with the work of constitutional courts. It's not something that the single lawyer in his law firm or much less so an entrepreneur in his in the management of his business on a daily basis will do. And nonetheless, if technology regulation follows through the way it seems it's going to follow through, this will be a fundamental issue. So getting this perspective right, getting this approach right, like we were saying, is of absolute importance. And without any further ado, if David is connected with us, I will just leave him the floor. Let's see if he's connected.
I am. Hello,
Oh,
can you hear me?
Great. We can hear you now. In a moment, we should be able to see you as well.
Very good. Great. No, thanks so much for the invite, for the kind introduction. I will start sharing my screen so that you can see the PowerPoint, and then I'll start.
Just give us a second. I don't know if... Okay, just a second, because we're trying to show you both on the screen here and online. Oops. Okay, perfect. We're ready.
Can you see
the floor
screen?
is yours.
Can you see the screen? Just quick confirmation, please.
We can see you and we can hear you now. So everything is ready. The floor is yours.
Hello, Andrea. Can you quickly confirm that you can see the PowerPoint presentation, please?
We can see the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Yes, you can see it. Okay, very good. So I'll start. No, thanks again for the kind invitation. It's a real pleasure for me to be with you. Unfortunately, not in person. I would have really loved to, and hope there will be another occasion. At the same time, hearing about the mess that air companies at the moment have, I'm happy about the opportunity to be at least with you online. Yes, so I work for the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights. So we are one of the over 40 EU agencies that the EU has set up, like the European Medicine Agency, the Border Agency, and so forth. And we're based in Vienna, but responsible for the entire EU. And our mandate is to collect data and analyze fundamental rights, human rights issues for the EU institutions and its member states. So we exist since 2007. And obviously have had to start working on new technologies like artificial intelligence for a couple of years now, since around 2017. And what we mainly do is as we call it, socio-legal research. So because I heard several times the topic of interdisciplinarity, and that's what we also try to embrace at the agency, where we have a lot of lawyers, human rights lawyers working with social scientists especially. And now also we need more and more people knowing about technology and to really come up with highly applied research. So our research is really for the purpose of the EU to develop policies in respect of fundamental rights. I have a presentation that will talk you through mainly what we are doing on the area. And I think it should be around 40 minutes or less, we will see, but please also let me know if you have any questions in between. So, next slide. Yes. So I like starting presentations with the Google Trends of three of the buzz terms we hear very often in the past. which is big data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. So if you look at this graph, that's the relative share of people were searching for these terms since 2004. And I think it tells a nice story. You can see in the orange line, which is the term big data, which was almost nothing up until 2010, and then it really started picking up. And more people were looking for what is actually big data. That was the new term that came up. And that actually nicely fits the time when if you think back, when you had your first proper smartphone, the way you have it now with all the apps installed, where you can access social media on your phone, that was really only around 2009, 2010. So every day you started sending loads of data to companies, and there was really the realization we collect many more data, which was just possible because of faster processes and computational power. And then a few years later, you see in the purple line that the term machine learning. So it took about 2 years that people started searching, well, actually machine learning, because that's nicely linked to what do we actually do with all this data. I mean, just having the data as such is nice, but of course we need to make use of them. And that is really where the machine learning technology comes in, with all the further developed algorithms and processing power that can really help to predict certain aspects in life at a very high accuracy. And this then actually further led to the realization that whatever we understand under the term AI, machines and computers taking over tasks that were usually done by humans, that this machine learning can also be used for AI. And then, more and more people, especially in the policy area, only started using the term AI, which started increasing. Machine learning still dominating the search terms. You can also see there was AI high in 2003 and 4, and I actually have no idea why this was the case. There was a Hollywood movie, I think, around that time. But anyway, so that was just the opener, a lot of data, a lot of opportunities to work with them. And this societal, let's say, technical development was matched by a high level of attention to this topic at the policy level. So as we work on EU policy, it started around 2017. That first of all, the European Parliament, they published 2 resolutions that highlighted the importance of robotics and big data, also mentioning the term AI. And of course, referring to the importance of the economy for the EU, but also highlighting ethical and fundamental rights issues. About the same time, the European Council, so where the member states assemble, they concluded in October 2007 also that there is an importance for the EU to address AI topics, and actually urged the European Commission as the third main EU institution to get active in the field. And that was also when the European Commission started with major initiatives in April 2018. First of all, with a communication on AI for Europe, where it all started with this 2-tier approach. On the one hand, it's important to foster it for the economy. On the other hand, have a trustworthy approach to really respect fundamental rights. And in this communication, also the Fundamental Rights Agency was mentioned to start research and inform the policy debate on what, in fact, are the fundamental rights issues linked to the use of AI. At the same time, there was the initiative of the high-level expert group on AI that assembled 52 high-level experts from different fields, from business, from policy, from academia, working on AI. And the head of the research unit, so my head of my unit was also a member of this group. I was an observer to the group and joined several meetings. And this was where ethical guidelines were developed for the use of AI. Also, as Andrea mentioned before, an assessment list on how to approach the assessment of AI. And this group had quite an important impact on the policy level that actually led also, as part of it, the Commission to decide to regulate on a horizontal level the topic of AI. At the same time, European countries also joined forces in a declaration on also joining investments on AI, which also, however, the declaration mentioned the importance of observing fundamental rights. the plan of the European Commission was to act very fast, to come up with a law as quickly as possible. At the same time, also, of course, having to realize it's a very complex issue. It's not easy to regulate. So first of all, the Commission published a white paper on artificial intelligence, a European approach to excellence and trust. Again, these two fields, trust on the one hand and excellence on the other, in February 2020, and that paper outlined the plans of the European Commission to come up with a proposal on AI. And then that's actually the third bullet point. So it was in the first quarter of 21 when the European Commission published a proposal for a regulation directly applicable in the EU member states on AI. I also mentioned here, I think that's also relevant, in December 2020, the European Commission also published a proposal for the Digital Services Act, which aims to regulate the conduct of online platforms, including the term very large online platforms, which targets the main platforms, and also has several relevant provisions for the regulation of new technologies, transparency on technologies, and fundamental rights assessments. Initially, there was a different order planned in this presentation, so I expected also Brando Benifei to have covered the AI Act. So I don't have very much on the AI Act at the moment in the presentation, but I think I'm happy to pick it up in the questions, and I think it will also be covered more later on. Just important also, when it comes to policy making, there's also the Council of Europe. For those of you not working so much in the field, the Council of Europe is not an EU body, it's a separate international organization with 46 member states. Unfortunately, only anymore, though Russia was a member of the Council of Europe, but was recently kicked out because of its interference in Ukraine. And the Council of Europe also developed after the Second World War and has the aim to foster human rights, rule of law, and democracy. And it's a secretariat to the European Convention on Human Rights. And the Council of Europe had several expert committees that were relevant for AI, coming up also with rules on how to deal with algorithms and develop so-called soft law instruments. That is recommendations adopted by the ministers of the Council of Europe for the member states, how to approach also the governance and working with algorithms and AI. And also the Council of Europe has several existing conventions, like Convention 108 Plus. That's a modernized convention on data protection, which is very similar to the GDPR, but can also be signed and ratified by countries outside the EU. So it has a wider reach beyond the EU. And the Council of Europe created a so-called ad hoc committee on AI called CAHAI in November 2019, which ran for 2 years and assessed if it's actually feasible to come up with an international treaty on AI that could potentially be have legally binding elements in it. And the conclusion was, after 2 years, yes, it is. And based on this assessment, also the ministers of the Council of Europe agreed to create a new committee on AI, which had its kickoff meeting in Rome, in fact, in April 2020, to establish an international negotiation process and conduct work to elaborate an appropriate legal framework on the development, design, and application of AI. So there is an international treaty discussed at the moment. It will take, I assume, at least 2 more years, but it's also very active in the field. What is more, still on the international level, there's also other international organizations are very active. As you know, the OECD, from economic perspective mainly, but also trustworthiness has soft law recommendations. On the global level, it's especially UNESCO adopted recommendations on the ethical use of AI. and also others. And there's actually a small informal, I would say, group of these international organizations, including the Council of Europe, the European Commission, the Fundamental Rights Agency, the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank Group, UNESCO, OECD, and United Nations. And there's a website also where you can look into all of these organizations' work on policy making on AI. And this is very relevant because also the member states in the EU, they called on these international organizations to collaborate and work together on AI policy making, because it is, many are working it. It is a difficult field, and it's important to within the respective mandates of these organizations to harmonize the approach and exchange, also not to duplicate work in the area and so forth. That was the international level. Also, of course, at the national level. So we also heard just about efforts in Italy. At the Fundamental Rights Agency, we 2 years ago did a mapping of national initiatives on AI, on policy initiatives, and came up with a list of over 350 initiatives. And that was already, I think, 1 or 2 years ago. You can find it on our website. It's an Excel sheet that you can also use for analysis if you want. Which show that really the member states were also getting very active in regulating AI. And yeah, this list was also picked up by the OECD, and DG JRC of the Commission is also very active in observing developments on policymaking in the member states. So the approach of the Fundamental Rights Agency, what we identified initially is that there are 2 important elements when it comes to AI policymaking. First of all, there's a need for a rights-based approach. As I just explained, there was wide policymaking on policy development on different levels on AI. And at the beginning, there were different approaches to it, and very often it was, as I said, ethical approach to AI, and on the other hand, you often hear the rights-based, the human rights-based approach of AI, and I don't think this is a clash as such, but sometimes it was a bit problematic and a different way of how to approach the regulation of AI. Obviously, as the Fundamental Rights Agency, it was important for us to bring in the rights-based approach of fundamental rights. That's not because ethics are not good. We need ethics for sure, but the problem sometimes with the push for ethical approaches was done by industry, sort of in an effort to avoid a regulation, because ethics are often voluntary schemes. And it was, of course, important for us to highlight that fundamental rights are legally binding on the member states. Human rights are also legally binding on member states. It's their duty to protect them. So it is much better to start with the human rights approach, as it's a legally binding approach, and is also more instrumental. At the same time, I also saw a few discussions on academic exercises on how shall we frame ethics on AI, how do we operationalize ethics. And I think that's also something where human fundamental rights have a main advantage, that there's years and decades of experience on an ethical framework, if you want, so that was democratically agreed upon and operationalized the foundations of how our societies should work. And that's really the starting point on how it should be approached. So important to base it on rights. And to really promote the existing knowledge on fundamental rights. As it's the state's duty to observe fundamental human rights, if they are not enough protected, there is the need for regulation to safeguard fundamental rights, and that was also part of the initiatives of the Commission to come up with a law to further safeguard fundamental rights. At the same time, making laws is one thing. The other is, of course, how to implement laws. And I think that's also where ethical guidance or ethics guidelines can be very useful for industry, for companies, even also for public administration, to understand actually how to translate these legal principles into practice. And this is what I will also speak about in a moment. Apart from a rights-based approach, there's a big need for an evidence-based approach. AI is a very broad field, obviously. It can be used in virtually all areas of life. You can collect data almost anywhere and then build predictive models. If they work is another question, but at least you can try in virtually all areas. So it's very broad. At the same time, we have still only scattered knowledge, and we lack evidence on how fundamental rights may be impacted. There were, of course, a lot of cases that showed us that there is a problem. You know, we know in recruitment softwares, there can quite easily be a gender bias included. When Microsoft built a chatbot years ago, it very quickly became a racist online. And so that something can go wrong is quite clear, but how this can be avoided, how this can be used in practice, we still lack knowledge. And here it's really important to focus on, as we heard before, on concrete use cases. Because these abstract discussions, you may have realized they often, you know, they're also influenced by Hollywood movies and science fiction, where people start discussing things that are not really happening on the ground. So it's the concrete use cases that we need to approach policymaking and regulation and assessment of AI. So I just wanted to see, please let me know if there's anything in the chat, because I don't really see it on my screen. So the Fundamental Rights Agencies, we started around 2017-18 working on AI with the aim to contribute to better understanding fundamental rights implications of AI and big data. And then importantly, contributing to setting out fundamental rights guidelines and recommendations. And the term contribute was added very soon in the beginning, because, as you know, many are working on the topic. There are many guidelines and assessments available, like the assessment list of the high-level expert group on AI. And it's not about developing another set of guidelines, but really contributing with evidence and knowledge on how to approach this best. So we have a couple of publications in 2018, a paper on discrimination and algorithms, showing it can happen. There are several reasons how discrimination can happen. Discrimination being understood as differential treatment of people based on certain protected characteristics like ethnic origin or sexual orientation and so forth through the use of algorithms. We also published a paper on data quality and AI, highlighting the relevance of data quality, which is now relatively well known, but it also took a while. I think in computer scientists classes, it was not that regular years ago that data quality aspects were covered, or in textbooks. And yeah, here I think we brought in also some of social science views on how data quality can be assessed and how this actually can also impact on your rights. We had a special paper on facial recognition technology in 2019, and the main report was published in December 2020 called Getting the Future Right. And I will present some of the results in this presentation. We also continue working on it. We work on another report on bias and algorithms, which will come out later this year, and also putting the bias discussion a bit into the discrimination context. Yeah, so one study we did was in 5 EU member states, in Estonia, Spain, Finland, France, and Netherlands. We carried out 100 interviews with public administration and the private sector, a few with experts, but mainly with public administration, private sector, with people who are using AI, who are using tools for their business purposes, like not the companies that sell AI, but the companies that use technology to improve their businesses. Also, public administration using new technologies, algorithms for the use of AI. In addition, we had country research on policy developments, and with this tried to come up with a bit more guidance on the lawmaking at the European Commission proposal. First of all, what we found in the research, and what is still important to remember, because that's relevant for the ongoing discussion still, there is no accepted one definition of AI. We used in our research a definition developed by the high-level expert group on AI, which you can read here on the slides. I can read it out quickly. AI refers to systems that display intelligent behavior, analyzing the environment and taking actions with some degree of autonomy to achieve specific goals. If that's now clear to you, then I congratulate you. I think it's a very, very generic and vague definition, which is still open for interpretation. And what we found actually was we used this definition, and then we had people talking about a variety of different technologies, and really not an agreement of what AI is, because some people, they are quite easygoing. Any algorithm based on 2-3 rules or any Excel file may be called AI already. Others say no, it starts only with machine learning. Others say no, it's not even machine learning, it's only specific technologies within machine learning, like neural nets and deep learning. So there is no agreement at this stage. And that makes it a bit difficult also for policy making, because this discussion is still ongoing. So what we found when interviewing people, we looked especially into the selected areas: social welfare, marketing, law enforcement, and health services. And we found technologies that vary according to the level of automation, meaning sometimes the systems are used to really automate decisions without any human intervention. But others were still only provided recommendations to humans for their review and then making the decisions. There were different levels of complexity. As I mentioned, some had really easy and straightforward algorithms to use. Others worked on really high-level deep learning technologies. Also, one case with reinforcement learning, where it got really complex and difficult to understand. And then we also see that the use of AI has different impact on individuals, the possible harm that can happen if something goes wrong. And lastly, also the impact on society, meaning the scale of usage, how many people are impacted on by the use of a certain scheme. And I think these different levels also help to frame different technologies that are currently discussed under the heading of AI. A lot. So on this graph, you can see a few examples we found in our research. So you can see on this graph, on the horizontal axis is the complexity from left to right, from low to high. And on the vertical axis, you can see the level of automation, with low meaning full human review, high being fully automated. And so here is a classical low example. There are some rule-based decisions on social benefits. They could be as easy as if your income is below the median income and you have 2 children and only one parent at home, then you're eligible for a certain amount of allowances. As a very easy example, there are also different ways, and even those were not fully automated, but people were reviewing if there's no other information. But there were also some efforts on automating such easy decisions and algorithms. In the middle, there is mainly methods that are at least based on rather traditional statistics, like regression analysis for credit scoring. Here we found examples that were actually fully automated for the score and risk category. Others were only using them as an input for the assessment on credit worthiness. And then sometimes machine learning is also used only to support the production of statistics and forecasts, which are then only the basis to inform certain policy decisions. Moving to the more interesting part on the right, high level of complexity. There are examples like medical images, which you can see in the orange box on the right bottom. Analysis, cancer diagnosis, for example, which are based on sophisticated methods, but obviously a doctor is still then looking at the patient and digests all this information for making decisions. So that there's obviously no automation, no full automation behind. A bit in between is predictive policing, use of face recognition technology, where people put on watch lists on the streets, may be flagged to the police, and then the police are checking if this is really the same person. If yes, then they would decide to stop a person. And then on the most fancy part we found in our research, at least the deep learning and even reinforcement learning for advertising. Obviously, online companies, there's billions of data points in milliseconds. Decisions are taken automatically to increase the revenue of marketers. Yeah, so we also asked why people are using AI. And that was interesting that most people say just for the purpose of efficiency. And we haven't found many or none, in fact, in the interviews we did who said we do this for better decisions, in fact, more consistent definitions. So it's the main heading, at least in our research, was efficiency, which I think is good and interesting, but important also to remember that efficiency as such is not enough to interfere with fundamental rights. And that brings me to the fundamental rights framework, just a few sentences on it. So in the EU, we speak about fundamental rights, not human rights. You can think of the terms rather interchangeably, but fundamental rights are enshrined in the EU's Charter on Fundamental Rights, which fully includes the European Convention on Human Rights from the Council of Europe, and added a few more fundamental rights for EU citizens, like freedom of movement and so forth. And this has the same legal value as the treaties of the EU since 2009. Since the Lisbon Treaty, and is thus legally binding for all EU institutions and for the member states when they act within the frame of EU law. There's also important secondary law. Every one of you knows data protection laws. There are strong non-discrimination laws in the EU and so forth. There are also other international treaties, as I mentioned, the European Convention on Human Rights, which is accepted by all EU member states and all European states. And there are also United Nations instruments on human rights. On top of this, we have national specific laws in constitutions, there are fundamental rights enshrined. So that was again the point. This is a legally binding framework that should also be applied to any new technology. We highlight three rights areas on a horizontal basis after analyzing the use cases in our research. First of all, most obviously, it's data protection. As you know, because of the very detailed data collection that is possible nowadays, often through the internet, but also through other very detailed sensors, it quite easily can reveal information on people's private life that is not in line with the purpose it was intended for. When we spoke to companies and public administration working on AI, they were all aware of data protection issues. So that's nothing new. However, there are still some uncertainties. It's not always clear if people use personal data or not. That's not always entirely clear. It was also difficult to get an understanding, in fact, what kind of data companies are using. Not sure if that was because people weren't aware or if they didn't really want to share, in fact, details on the data, but that's still an important area to work on. In addition, people knew there are provisions on automated decision-making and human review in the GDPR, for example, but it was not always entirely clear about the exceptions on automated decision-making and how the GDPR provisions apply to AI. So there's clearly more need to get more clarity on that. Second important area is equality and non-discrimination. As I mentioned before, there are several examples where we clearly see that the tool picks up a certain signal in algorithms. This signal is then linked to one of the protected characteristics in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, such as ethnic origin, for example, and then could lead to differential treatment, putting people at a disadvantage just because of a protected characteristic. And that's the definition of discrimination. We see that there's a lack of analysis on non-discrimination. So the companies and public administration we interviewed, most of them said, yeah, we know this can happen, but for sure not on our side. We don't use data on protected characteristics, so it's all fine. And that's not necessarily true. And that's really something where more work needs to be done. Because of so-called proxies. Proxies meaning information that is highly correlated with protected characteristics, and this way could indirectly lead to discrimination. yeah, and in addition to this, attention to other group rights, like people with disabilities, older people or children rights, were not really on the radar of those developing AI. And the last area is access to an effective remedy. So that's linked to access to justice, and that's based on Article 47 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Basically meaning you always have the right to a fair trial, to complain about the decisions that were made about people. And here, I mean, the companies were aware of this, but at the same time, they have not received many complaints at this stage. And in this respect, it's important to come up with a discussion, not only how to inform people that AI is used when certain decisions are being made that can influence people. Also important to know where and how I can complain about potential mistreatment. And then comes the interesting part. When someone complains and goes to court, for example, or to another complaint body, then there is in fact the requirement that those using AI should be in a relatively good position to actually explain how this decision came about. And this is a very contested area because people often say, oh, AI, that's so complicated, we actually don't know how this works. And this, from a fundamental human rights perspective, for certain decisions is not acceptable. But I'll come to this in a moment because it's actually not that much of a challenge. As I mentioned before, any other fundamental rights are impacted by the use of AI. Good administration, consumer protection, freedom of expression, and so forth. It always depends on the context and area of application. So we strongly suggest to do impact assessments. This is not only the Fundamental Rights Agency, many, especially civil society actors, but also human rights defenders call for human rights or fundamental rights impact assessments before any AI is used that can have an impact on people. We've found that most are focusing obviously on technical aspects in the assessment. Of course, many want to be in line with data protection law, but no wider assessments on fundamental rights. Also, what is relevant, those using AI are not always sure like what bodies are responsible. I mean, people know that they're the data protection authorities, but that was not always the main authority responsible for it, and also this still is being clarified. So on a horizontal level, what we conclude in our report is that at a minimum, before AI is used, it needs to be made sure that data processed legally in full line with strong data protection regulations in the EU, should not lead to unfair treatment. Based on protected characteristics, people should not be unfairly treated, and it needs to be contestable. This means people need to be aware that AI is used, as I mentioned. They need to know how and where to complain, and those making decisions need to be in a position to provide information on how they arrived at certain decisions. And before some people think, but how can we do this? It's so complex. It's millions of parameters in some deep neural networks. We can't understand it. I think that's not really acceptable, because the most important step in getting ethical, fundamental rights compliant AI is transparency. So if a certain AI tool is being done, it needs to start with the general description of the purpose and context of the system. And that's already often missing. So what is, if it's supervised machine learning, which is most often used, what is the outcome that is optimized for? Is it just the click-through rate? Is it the revenue? Is it the matching of faces and so forth? Only when we know the purpose and the context of the system, it is actually possible to assess fundamental rights. How they're impacted. And the legal basis obviously is relevant depending on the sector it's used. Then comes the possible harm. Again, when we speak about supervised machine learning, those of you are aware of this, know the difference between false positive and false negatives. That could be in a face recognition technology software, for example, is a false positive if the system thinks this is the person on the watch list, but in fact the person is not. This is relevant, but also the other way around, false negatives, like the person on the watch list is going through the camera, but it's actually not detected. And to assess if the harm and the added value of a certain tool, a trade-off between those two is needed. Then the technology, I just have one bullet here, but I think it's not about understanding each of the million parameters, but it's to describe how did you decide on what technology to use? What algorithms were used? What machine learning libraries were used, for example? How was the process on deciding on hyperparameters and so forth? So just a generic description of the process of developing the technology. Then, importantly, data. Many people are aware, data collection, the data collection context. Where did you get the data from? Who was responsible for collecting them? What kind of information is included in the data? And that's relevant to assess potential discrimination. What pieces of information is there that could be picked up by the system and lead to discriminatory outcomes? And then what's the coverage? What's the time frame? What's the geographical coverage? And all of this is really basic information that can already give you a very good sense of if the data are fit for purpose, which is the generic definition of data quality, for the purpose and context of a specific system. Accuracy and tests across groups. So not only focusing on technical tests, but looking at accuracy rates, for example, and outcomes across different demographic groups. This only recently started to be more and more being done. And this can also really help to get a better understanding of if the system is working fairly or not. And then in machine learning, at least, most of the systems, however complex they are, there are libraries available that allow you to look into the most influential predictors. And also this gives a good sense already on how to, on what information is relevant for the decisions that are being recommended or done. Yes, I think much of this information is also included in the documentation requirements of the AI Act. And in this way, the AI Act will contribute to increasing the transparency and opportunities to assess fundamental rights. I have two concluding slides. I'm out of time. I'm also almost done. Is what our agency said, and that was actually before the proposed AI Act was published, but it still applies. So it's really important, depending on the area of application, that the full scope of fundamental rights is taken into account. I know there's often the discussion of, oh, that's such a burden, especially for small companies. Again, that's for the context it is used. If there's a potential real impact, then of course you have to do this assessment. Many applications, as also the Commission said, are not high risk, and then it's relatively safe to use. And you can spend a one-day workshop, for example, and assessing some of those rights, and often conclude that it's not the case. But for higher risk applications, it's really important to take into account the full scope of fundamental rights. Make mandatory prior impact assessments on the full spectrum of fundamental rights. Then, in addition, oversight is really relevant. That means bodies who can access the information, who can have the expertise also and knowledge to assess if there is some strong interference with fundamental rights. And that's the last slide. To include specific safeguards on non-discrimination. That's still one of the core rights. And that we heard also already before, we need much more targeted research on this to understand in what contexts it's not acceptable to use a certain technology, where it is possible to mitigate bias so that it's non-discriminatory, and where it can actually make more consistent decisions that avoid discrimination. More guidance on data protection on AI is also very much needed. And then, of course, ensure effective access to justice so that people can complain about the use that impacted their lives. And I think it was a little more than 40 minutes, but thank you very much for your attention, and happy for any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, David, for this interesting presentation. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience here. one there and one here. Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. I ask question compensation. Yes, I protect to human rights and data protection and etc. Insurance, but the damages, it's very important. And what is the put compensation? All the diagram. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the question. In compensation, you mean when a damage has occurred, right? When using AI, the compensation for damage.
David, do you want to collect another question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So thank you for your presentation. I'm a master's student in philosophy, and for my thesis, I'm developing a risk impact assessment of AI in the field of justice. So my question is, what is the agency's standing regarding the endorsement on the AI Act of a risk-based approach, and are risk-based approaches and a rights-based approach compatible? And why do you think, in case a rights-based approach is preferable? Thank you.
Thank you. One more, or shall I?
I think you can start answering these two questions if you want.
Great, sure. I'll start with the first one. I hope I understood it correctly about compensation when harm is being done, when mistreatment is being done. And that's an important question. And there is, first of all, it's a question of liabilities. And this is, in fact, still also being subject to policy discussion. So the Commission plans to come up with a new updated liability framework in the future. And that's a challenge in AI because some of the technologies are relatively new and there are no standards yet available. I know that ISO, for example, IEEE, and also the European standardization organizations, they currently start working on standards. But in the absence of standards, it's still relatively difficult or it's up to the courts, in fact, to decide on how and who is responsible for compensation. At the same time, of course, there are laws that protect fundamental rights, like the data protection law, and that's also if like companies breach data protection, they are of course liable for that, and there are also, as we know, a lot of fees put on them by data protection authorities that they have to pay when they were not in line with data protection laws. On one level higher, in fact, there's also human rights liabilities. The states, as I mentioned, they signed up to human rights. And also states can be brought to court. Think about the European Convention on Human Rights, and there are also liabilities and also to some extent compensations to be made if the state was in violation with one of the articles in the European Convention on Human Rights. So that's where we stand, but as I said, there's still policy making ongoing when it comes to real liabilities of new technology. And I hope that answered your question. Moving on to the second one is the risk-based approach. In general, the AI Act, the proposed AI Act, is much welcome by the Fundamental Rights Agency because, as I mentioned, the provisions will lead to an increased transparency. The agency has no formal opinion adopted, which is why I can't, have a full assessment of the AI Act. We have looked into several aspects of it. In general, I think the risk-based approach can work. What is challenging, obviously, is that the definition of AI will remain very generic. So it's the question of what falls under the scope of the law and what not. And here, the risk-based approach can actually help with these concrete use cases to be better defined, and this way providing some clarity of what use of AI falls under this regulation, and can also provide more legal certainty to those applying it. The risks obviously need to take into account fundamental rights. At the moment, the AI Act also has a provision that it will be flexible in the future on the list of high-risk use cases. This also means, and as I mentioned before, we still lack evidence on fundamental rights implications of AI. And we will learn in the years to come, like where are problems, maybe other high-risk use cases come up. At the moment, there's also still a discussion on what to include it, but this follows the process of lawmaking, so it's perfectly in line with rule of law requirements, and this way I think it's a good approach. But at the same time, as I mentioned, we have to pay attention of certain other uses and make sure that those are covered as well. One last point maybe as well, the AI Act, while welcome and will improve, it's not the only law that regulates AI. There's much more out there, such as data protection law, non-discrimination law. There's a lot of sector-specific laws. And in combination of these laws, they should provide then a good basis for hopefully further protecting fundamental rights that can be threatened by new technologies.
So I think we have a question from the online audience that we will kind of try to summarize. Okay.
Sure. So the question is, one second. So, do the participants had the occasion to be questioned about the perception of the new AI Act, and which was their perception about that?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there another one or just this one? Then I'll take it.
I think for the moment there is just this one. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think I partly answered it already. So there's no formal opinion developed by the agency I'm working for on the AI Act. But again, in general, it's a welcome initiative. It's really important because fundamental rights are put at as one of the core reasons for coming up with this law. And that's very welcome. And also when I had this discussion at the beginning about ethics versus rights approach, it was relatively quickly became clear that there needs to be a regulation, and also because of fundamental rights dangerous of certain AI applications. It is important for everyone to acknowledge it's a complex law because there are so many different aspects to it. One is, of course, the list of high-risk use cases. They should and are currently being scrutinized. If there should be more added. There are also discussions of which should be deleted. And then, of course, there's also provisions on prohibited practices of AI. And I think that's also very important. The definitions of prohibitions are very generic at the moment. And so it's really important to be more concrete and potentially think of adding some. I mean, let's think about there's a high-risk use case on the use of polygraphs, lie detectors in the area of asylum and migration. And I think, for example, that it's not in line with human rights to use lie detectors on asylum seekers in such a vulnerable position. So that could be considered to be forbidden as well. And so forth. I wouldn't know also where to start in assessing the full law, as there are so many detailed aspects. So if there are more detailed questions, I'm happy to react to them.
So David, thank you very much. I think you told us you can stay online with us longer today. So because now we have Brando Benifei, the European Member of Parliament, that is responsible for the debate around the AI Act, connected with us, and he only has a limited time slot. So I would just leave him the floor, and then we can resume the discussion with you later on in the morning. I'm sure there will be more questions for you. But for the moment, I would just like to introduce to you Brando Benifei. So he's an Italian member of the European Parliament. He's also serving his second term as the head of the delegation of Partito Democratico. in the European Parliament, and he's the rapporteur for the AI Act, and he will be telling us more about the most current debates that are happening at European level with respect to the AI Act. I know that he's connected with us over the internet, so I'll leave him the floor, and Brando, you're free to share your screen if you have a presentation or just speak. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us today.
Yes, thank you. But can you hear me? Can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thanks for this invitation. I'm talking to you from Strasbourg, from the start of the plenary of the European Parliament, which will work on the final steps to adopt the DSA and the DMA, the Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act. I mentioned that because it's connected to the whole issue about what we are doing on the digital sector. Today we talk about the AI Act. I was still traveling, so I couldn't listen to the first part of the discussion, but I got the slides that were shared by the Fundamental Rights Agency representative, and I can say that these topics, I will get to that later, on data and on fundamental rights are very much at the center of the European Parliament work on various files that have been at the center of our work on the digital issues. I mentioned already DSA and DMA, but also the Data Act, the CHIPS Act, the e-privacy, the data health space. All these initiatives are at various stages of advancement, but I mentioned all of these just to say that we are in a moment when the European Union is trying to build its model of innovation, and AI Act is also a part of that. Is, we can say, a set of rules to allow businesses to develop and citizens having the same rights everywhere in Europe. We are not just good at regulating in Europe. We have a big market that European companies can take advantage of. And at the same time, we have very clear, I would say, principles, values enshrined also in the treaties with the Charter of Fundamental Rights that tell us that we don't want to forget that technology and innovation shall serve people, mankind in general, and not the other way around. So I can say that broadly the Parliament has been supporting the approach of the European Commission of a trustworthy AI based on rules that, with the classification of risks, on which I will tell you more now, can build a uptake of AI in Europe that is based on trust, on respect of fundamental rights, of a human-centric approach. But as a politician, I can tell you that these might be very empty slogans if you don't feed them with specifics. So the work that the Parliament has started doing is strengthening these dimensions in the AI Act. The human-centricness, the trust issue, the respect of fundamental rights, their protection. But I have to say that the general approach is already a good start. Obviously, with this legal base of the product safety market approach, it's not easy. We are doing it, but it will not be easy to strengthen the protection in the workplace, which is something that was also earlier mentioned briefly. So, but I will tell you how the AI Act is organized. I mean, for sure, we have to say that artificial intelligence systems are particularly difficult to regulate because of unpredictability of certain open applications, of which we can only see some aspects today, but of which we are unable to fully anticipate the future evolution. This is precisely why we must create a legislative environment that is ready to exploit these potentials of artificial intelligence without affecting individual rights. We are in a very heated moment if we think of the economic distress we are living in and the impact of changes that are already affecting some sectors. In these days in Italy, there was a huge strike by taxi drivers that is directed against the government, but is in fact against also the changes that are happening. And we know that now we also have platforms that work with digital instruments, digital platforms to create opportunities for a competition in this field. But what will happen when we will have autonomous cars fully in place? And what will happen to the jobs? So I want to say, as a premise to the whole discussion on the AI Act, that we don't need only this regulation based on the ideas that I sketched earlier, but we also need investment in skilling, in reskilling, in support for our researchers, because today, if we compare how much is the income of researchers in Italy, also in this field, compared to other countries in Europe, obviously with some exceptions and with some excellence areas. I mean, I know the place I'm in now in this conference, but in general, while we have a national AI strategy that is focusing on this idea of investing in research and in the people that are working on AI, then we need to actually give them the conditions to not leave our country. So skills, investment in the human capital that is working on AI, sectorial acts that we will need apart from the AI Act. We are talking about areas where the AI Act will not be influencing directly. That's for sure the military, that's for sure some issues regarding the vehicles, the airplanes. So we have some areas where we need to have a separate regulation, but also there is the issue of investment. We need to have a public and private investment in the sector if we want it to develop. It's not just regulation, but obviously the way we regulate will also influence how we can invest and what kind of support there can be. So the way this act is written is based on levels of risk. What does it mean? That we classify AI based on the level of risks that we are considering will be endured by society, by individuals, with the contact with systems of AI of these various categories, and we regulate based on this level of foreseen risk. So the highest risk level is the so-called unacceptable risk, which that covers cases where AI is considered a threat to the security and fundamental rights of individuals to an unacceptable level. Examples include the biometric recognition for surveillance objectives in the public spaces, the social credit system. Then we can say the predictive policing has been added as an unacceptable risk by the amendments that, together with the other rapporteur of the parliament, I presented. And we are also working around the issue of biometric recognition to strengthen the forbidden, because there are some exceptions now in the text that we don't want to support. I'm talking about biometric recognition for surveillance reasons, both in public and private spaces. We don't exclude biometric data to be used with the consent of the person involved for some activity, but we are trying to really restrict this kind of area. And I mentioned already the issue of the social scoring, which is very much debated also based on experiences of other parts of the world. Then high-risk cases is the core of this regulation, because it's the area of the categories where we do the highest degree of regulation. Is critical infrastructure, such as transportation, access to education or vocational training, and in general, access to public services, product safety components, employment, essential public and private services, uses that deal with fundamental rights, the use at borders and in the legal sphere and in the democratic activity. I just made some examples. These are all listed in an annex that are the areas where we see the high risk. The Commission, based on their own list that we amended, but not so much, so we can say it's still valid, has calculated that around 20% of AI systems in place will go into this category. Then we go for also for two other categories: the limited risk, where we see specific transparency obligations, but not obligations for a proper certification, that is the high risk category requirement. High risk AI will need a process of certification that in the text is proposed as a self-certification, while from the Parliament we are also proposing to go for some third-party certification. Then, as I said, there is limited risk where we go for transparency obligations. For example, the case of chatbots and some modifications for video and audio that are done with the AI, and minimum risk, which is AI-enabled video games, spam filters. Consider that we are not moving in an empty legal space. GDPR, which we strengthen in its reference in the text to avoid any confusion on some parts, for example, when we deal about national security, are obviously needed to be respected when we treat personal data. So we are building a horizontal regulation for the specific needs of AI, but the existing laws obviously apply. We need to balance also the responsibilities between developers and users. This is another big point. We need to, this is something we are still working on as Parliament with our proposals, is to the issue of balancing of the certification that needs to be done in terms of quality of data, of respect of procedures for an AI that is able to respect fundamental rights by the developers. But then the users need also to have some responsibility. Could it be a public authority or a private sector? From the Parliament, we are proposing to have a proper human rights impact fundamental rights impact assessment. This was also referred to in the previous discussion. We are proposing that. I can tell you that I get such a hard feedback by businesses on this. There is a bit of worriness about the burden that can be put to them. But I have to say that we are very much willing to find a balance. And I think that if we propose a human rights impact assessment that is viable, that is doable, it will only be a factor of trust for consumers and citizens and will not be something unbearable. And I can tell you that just about the involvement of businesses that I mentioned, but also of associations, of social partners, of the academia. We have been proposing from the Parliament to strengthen the participation of civil society in all steps, like the standardization process, the building of the sandboxes that is important also for research, so as spaces for experimentation in a protected area, consultations with the AI board that will be built at European level, and with the national authorities. I'm mentioning now, when I mention the European board, the national authorities, another big topic, the governance and enforcement. These are topics where I have to tell you there are very different ideas also in the Parliament. The discussion shows that there are very different approaches. You can see them by the 3,300 amendments that have been deposited. On some topics, we see a convergence in the Parliament discussion. For example, in strengthening the biometric surveillance restrictions and forbidden, which I mentioned earlier. But on governance and enforcement, we see very different approaches on how much role we should give to the board, how much role we need to give to the national authorities, how much the Commission should act in infringements that are of a transnational nature. So as I mentioned, the Parliament is doing work to strengthen the regulation on these topics. I didn't mention one, only briefly earlier. Another topic where we see amendments, especially from me, on the workplace adoption of AI. Workers today often don't even know that AI is used on them. And we want to be sure that existing laws at national level and involvement of the social partners is envisaged when we introduce AI in the workplace. But also we want to be sure that we have high risk categorization for anything that goes for hiring and firing, productivity software that has been, I have to tell you, very much developed in the period of the pandemic. You know it. And it's something that needs to be well placed inside the regulation. When I said well placed and we need to be sure to cover it, why I'm saying it? Because obviously I didn't talk about that, but definition of AI and exceptions of application are an issue of a big discussion, because the definition proposed by the Commission, which I have to say I support and the Parliament generally supports, is quite wide, but tries to avoid that there are loopholes that can be used to avoid to be regulated by the AI Act. It's easy to, if the definition gets more restricted, to find way outs not to be a part of the regulation. And this needs to be considered, and that's why we think that we should leave a large definition, and we should go for standardization to develop better understanding on some aspects that might be uncertain. And we also are clear that we don't want general purpose AI, AI that can be adapted to different uses, to be outside the scope of the regulation. There can be foreseen uses of a general purpose AI that can be identified in the categories of the high risk, and then this system needs to be put under the certification process. This way, we also avoid an imbalanced situation, so that in the end, it's only the smaller businesses that need to bear with the risks and the responsibilities, while the developer at a higher level, often a bigger business organization, could be free of responsibility. To go to the end, what are we doing in terms of the legislative process? I mentioned some of the work that the Parliament is doing: fundamental rights impact assessment, strengthening protection for vulnerable groups against discrimination and bias, basic obligations for all AI systems, also outside the high-risk category, the workplace use of which I mentioned, conformity assessment by third-party bodies for the high-risk, environmental impact of AI, which is very much lacking in the text of the Commission. These issues that I just mentioned are very strongly dealt with my amendments. But obviously, I need to work with the other colleagues. We are starting negotiating. We presented 3,300 amendments, and we will need to build compromise amendments. Also, I have a co-rapporteur. We are two. I come from the Internal Market Committee. The colleague is from the Civil Liberties Committee, and we are associated. These are the committees responsible, so we have two. It's very rare that we have two rapporteurs, but for the most important files, this happens because it's the idea that we can facilitate negotiations by having two of the biggest political groups that work together. This has been done also for other important files in the past, and it's true that what me and my colleague, the other co-rapporteur, can agree on, that has been presented in the first batch of amendments that we did together, a few hundreds, it's already quite strong for approval, because my political group is the second biggest, his political group is the third biggest, and the Socialist and Democrats group is from the Liberals. Together we are about 40-something% of the party. So just to give you a little of this technique of how we are doing, and then we are working now on really starting on the compromise amendments to be built based on these proposals. We need to see where we have differences and where we are closer and find compromises. I mentioned a few topics on this. And then the idea is that by the end of the year, we could have a Parliament position. Then we hope that the Council also is ready, so that at the beginning of the next year, we are starting the interinstitutional negotiations, Parliament and Council, to find a common position and to finalize the legislation. I mean, just to conclude, I think that you can get it clear, not just from this presentation, if you look at the work that we have been doing in terms of proposals to amend the regulation, but also if we look at the work that the European Parliament has been doing in the last 2 years with parliamentary initiative reports on AI, not legislative, but with a political direction on various topics, the use of AI in education and culture, the use of AI for surveillance, the use of AI in the citizenship issues. and the AIDA committee. It might be familiar with some of you because it had, especially in the academia, some echo, this work of the parliament for around 1 year and something, of discussion on AI in a special committee that produced a final report that has inspired, in terms as a proposal, this work that we are doing now on the AI Act, and also on the other digital files where AI is also touched. So as you see, we are doing quite a thorough work where the AI Act is the pivot, is the central point. It's also central for the need that we have to discuss with the rest of the world about these rules. For example, the risk-based approach of the AI Act, I can tell you, has found interest in the rest of the world as an approach that can be considered. Also, for example, on the transatlantic dimension with the US. In 2 weeks, I will be in Washington discussing with some regulators also about this. And we want, I mean, we cannot say that the AI Act will impose a model for the rest of the world. I don't think we can think that this will happen. That's my opinion. But I think it will contribute to the very important and very fundamental need of opening a debate with the rest of the world about how we regulate AI. And I think this will be a very important development for this, which is the first horizontal, holistic regulation of AI ever. I want to remind you also, I think you all know it very well, but just to be clear that this is a regulation, so it's a directly applicable piece of legislation that will not undergo national adaptation. This is very relevant to say. It's the hardest way the union can regulate something. So it's very important that the experts, the ecosystem of AI continues to be involved in how we develop this model. As I said it earlier, we strengthened in the amendments from the parliament the involvement at all stages of the development of this regulation, also in its application. So I have to say that it's very important that there are summer schools, there are initiatives, there are debates like this one that can build a community that can keep a dialogue also for the further steps. So thank you for inviting me, and I hope I gave you some useful insights on the work that we are doing in the European institutions on these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I don't know if you have time to answer some questions that we're getting from the audience, and I would also have...
I have.
Okay, great. So I don't know if there's somebody in the room. I know there's already one online. Okay, so we can ask the one online for the moment. Okay, this is a quite specific question. It has to do with an article I am very much myself interested in, which is Article 5, the one of prohibited AI practices. And this question has to do with the word, the meaning of the word subliminal. The Article 5 is the one that says that AI-based applications that use subliminal techniques could be prohibited. And this is something that is very much a matter of concern for many roboticists. We are currently, with our research center, also collaborating with some roboticists that are developing robot companions, so applications that are primarily intended to interact with human beings, entertain them, engage them with them socially and eventually even emotionally, typically triggering an emotional response by the human user. Very often it's old people, frail individuals, so robot carers, this could be one application. And there is a lot of research in this domain. So these researchers are kind of concerned with what could Article 5 prohibit with respect to their research? Do you have any more insight on this?
Yes, this is a very delicate issue. In fact, I agree that we need to be careful on what we prohibit and what we don't prohibit on this. You need to consider that we have a specific way of legislating in the European Parliament and with the Council. If we want to obtain a certain result, we always need to be able to propose that proposal plus, because if we know that our interlocutor is on another position, unfortunately, we cannot. We can say it's the physics of the negotiations. We cannot just put what we actually want, but we need to go further. So I'm saying this because on the issue of emotional recognition, subliminal techniques, we are proposing also hard forbiddals to reach a balance between different proposals and different ways of conceiving. Personally, I think that based on what I've seen, we should be careful not to exclude all the possibilities to use these technologies. But also we need to be sure that we are able to put very strong safeguards. And so we need to act accordingly in this negotiating phase. But I share that we need to be careful on this, on what we allow and what we prohibit, not to be limiting totally, and that we need to keep a discussion with, as we have done. In fact, the world of research and also, for example, on the health sector, when we deal with this the kind of application of AI. I have still time until 12:30, so there is still time for other questions or issues if you have.
Thank you very much. This is a super interesting topic. As I was saying, we're doing a lot of research on this very specific issue here at EURA because there is so much to say about human-machine, human-AI interaction. And indeed, like some engineers themselves put it, AI can learn not only what you like, but what you cannot resist. And this plays a gigantic role in shaping human behavior. And also, for instance, it could touch upon a very delicate aspect of European regulation that is consumer protection. So typically, traditionally, the European Union has been stressing very much the importance of protecting its consumers through substantive regulation. And this could be a new frontier of consumer protection, because if different kinds of AI-based applications could play a relevant role in manipulating human perception and also human decisions. And I'm also part to a committee of the IEEE that is working on empathic technologies, and there is a lot of work even among social scientists on this domain. And I agree with you, we do not need to prohibit everything, but being granular, being specific about what should not be possible to pursue, that is of great importance, of strategic importance in order to offer adequate protection to European citizens and technology users. But we already have another question from the audience here, so.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I have a question about what you said, that the AI Act doesn't refer to AI in the workplace. It's really complex to understand it, and I know there is a proposal for a directive about improving the working conditions in the platform work, and there are, at the original proposal, a few statements about transparency of the algorithms and human review, and as well it says that in those circumstances the IP rights and commercial secret could not be a refusal to transparency. So my question is, could this proposal for a directive in the platform work be a start in the discussion for AI in the workplace? Could it be mixed together, these two provisions, or what do you think about it? Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, I can answer. And also I want to comment on the other point about consumers. We think that this approach on the protection of consumers needs to be strengthened in the regulation. In fact, we are proposing new articles to strengthen the redress mechanisms for consumers to avoid that everything needs to be brought to the judiciary, but that the national authorities can be involved, data protection authorities and market surveillance, so that we have a more multi-level protection for citizens and consumers specifically. On the last point, the questions that was just posed, maybe I was a bit too tranchant, a bit too quick. I will reformulate, because I'm not saying that we cannot treat the workplace impact of AI in the regulation. What I wanted to say is that the legal base chosen puts some limits. So we are a bit forcing our way through. In fact, the European Parliament has proposed to also have an extra act, an extra legislation specifically for AI in the workplace with a different legal base. This is even in the AIDA final report. It has been put through strong negotiation supported by me that it needed to be there. But we are trying to do our best also in the AI regulation, knowing that the member states don't want that to be there, that the workplace impact of AI should be not too much specified in the existing, in this regulation, and that the reference to the national laws, to the fact that we don't want to go against the existing obligations based also on social partners agreements. This needs all to be very much specified, because Vestager, the vice president of the commission, has said that everything will be anyway respected of the national legislation, but that's really not always the case if we are not very clear. So we have been trying to strengthen. You can see by reading my amendments on that point that we have been pushing on strengthening the protection for workers that are subject to AI in terms of transparency, in terms of classifying in high risk everything that is related to the workplace. Then you mentioned the directive on the platform workers. Obviously, we are coordinating very tightly on that because the platform workers directive has some important rules regarding the misclassification of workers. So the presumption of being an employee and not an autonomous worker, but also on the algorithm governance, transparency, quality that you mentioned. But we need to be careful. We cannot rely only on that directive, because it's a directive, so it will be adapted nationally. And also it regards only the platform workers. Even though the parliament will try to expand a bit the remit of that directive, it will stay in the end. I can not see where the negotiations will go. As I told you, I'm following that very strictly because we need to coordinate. They will end up being only for the platform workers, as it was originally thought of. And so in the AI Act, we put protections for workers that are affected by AI, whatever is their work, not just platform workers. This is very important to be understood because it's a different thing. So we are trying to do a coordination, because clearly in the platform workers directive, you can go a bit deeper because of how the directive is conceived. But in the AI regulation, we can put some protections, some safeguards I mentioned a bit of them, also the inclusion of the social partners, that can affect all workers that have interaction with AI, not just the platform workers. So, and as I said, the Parliament wants a specific act on workplace and AI. But in the meantime, because we are skeptical that this will come out in this mandate, we want the AI Act to be as strong as possible on these aspects. I hope I was clearer now. I was a bit quick on the point earlier. I finish my time now, so I want to thank you, and I hope we can stay in touch for further work on the topic. We for sure have still a lot of time, because as I said, it will take at least another 1 year to get to the end of this work.
So thank you very much for being here with us. There were more questions in the audience, but I understand it was already very generous of you to spend this almost an hour together with us. So I thank you once more, and we definitely will be in touch, because we have lots of ideas and we're working on a lot of files here as well. And in the past, we collaborated very much with the European Parliament, also with the European Commission, but very much also with the European Parliament. With our research center, we wrote a number of studies for the jury committee, for instance, on civil liability and AI, on drones, and other issues. So we'll definitely be in touch, and we'll exploit this connection that we have managed to establish. So now what we can do is, before our lunch break, we still have time to get back to the discussion we were having before with David, that I assume he's still online. I don't know if there are any more questions in the audience for David, the previous speaker. Otherwise, I also have some comments. Yes. Okay, one question over here. Yes.
Thank you. I ask question, the important topics, non-personal data and personal data, and how to separate non-personal data and personal data, and how to use sensitive data, and how to determine anonymization techniques, how to regulate. What do you think about?
Thank you. Shall I react right away?
Yes, David, if you want to try to answer.
No, sure. Thanks a lot for the question. Yeah, I think on the first point, I have no definite answer, apart from the fact that we actually need more work and guidance on what personal data is or how to deal with it. Because according to the GDPR, personal data are data that can be related to an individual. And the problem is that we know also at FRA, for example, where we do a lot of surveys, if you take from a data set away directly identifiable information like the name, address, social security number, there may still be information included that allows you to identify a person. And the GDPR speaks about here that if people make a reasonable effort to get this information, that the person is then identifiable. However, there's no clear guidance, and there also is, the Data Act, for example, at the proposed, which I cannot comment on in detail, but just to mention that this is an ongoing field of discussion. If there may be a personal identifiable information included, then this has to be treated from a data protection perspective, meaning that you have to, under certain circumstances, also carry out a data protection impact assessment. And that links to what is the risk that private information can be revealed or not. But as I said, there's much more work to be done. And before I come to the sensitive attributes point, I think there needs to be more work on how personal data can be shared, also for research purposes, because I also feel that data protection may be, at some instances, be also not necessarily misused, but at least too carefully interpreted, so that often data cannot be shared for research purposes. And that's not good, because I think there are several ways in how personal data can also be shared for research purposes. It's not always to limit the identifiable information in the data sets, because if you do this to be on the very safe side, then there's often no information left in the data set that it's useful for research. But in statistical data sharing, there are quite some good lessons learned in this area, in fact, where you don't only make the data safer, but you also control the users. For example, that you check who is using the data, that you can only get access to data through applications, for example. You can also make sure that data do not leave a certain environment. You know, for certain data, like statistical offices do that, you have to go there and use the data. But that's an important topic for the future on how personal data can be also better used for research purposes. And you know, where are the risk thresholds of revealing personal information and when not? This is especially delicate when it comes to information on protected characteristics. And here there's actually a very interesting provision in the proposed AI Act, Article 10, paragraph 5, where it says that users and developers of AI can use, when strictly necessary, information on protected characteristics to monitor and mitigate discrimination. And this was put in there because at the moment, it's people often would not use or collect data on protected characteristics because they enjoy stronger protection, of course. And this, to some extent, is needed, because if you want to detect if there's certain discrimination, you also need this information to check, for example, if certain information is a proxy for ethnic origin, to check if the system is discriminating. And here, I think there needs, if this remains in the AI Act, this provision, there need to be strong safeguards, which it also is planned at the moment, meaning that you only collect this data for the purpose of checking for discrimination, store the data separately, and so forth. But again, that's just very good questions you mentioned, and a lot of space for research based on specific use cases to get a better understanding where and how we need certain data and can use them.
Okay. Any more questions for David? Sorry. I have one myself, if I may. I would like to ask you, what do you think will be the role of companies in developing a fundamental right-based approach or assessment of AI-based technologies? At the event we met in, it was entirely business-driven, let's put it this way. It was the initiative of big businesses, the organization of that very debate. So what, and I know that large companies are making a huge effort to be, let's say, ahead of the second bounce of the ball. So in front of this debate, to be ready for when legislation comes out and know what to do. So what do you think will be the role of businesses in shaping the real approach to a fundamental right-based assessment of technologies? Because yes, the law makes reference to it, but the way it's written, it will be always quite vague, leaving a lot of room to fill on how that is actually done. So besides the effort that you as the European institutions are making, what do you think will be the contribution of businesses in this debate?
Great, thank you. Good question. Important question. Yeah, first of all, as mentioned, it is important to get laws out there that are as clear as possible, to only leave flexibility where this may be useful. But that's, as I mentioned, start with the definition of AI, when to apply. And that's really important for businesses to provide them also with legal certainty. And I think some of the businesses, some large companies were in fact also pushing for a regulation. They were actually pushing for a law on face recognition technology, for example, because it wasn't clear to them, can we develop, can we use this technology? Will it be forbidden in the end? Is it legal or not? So first of all, I think regulation as such is also very helpful for companies. Then it depends, of course, on the size of companies. As you mentioned, large companies, they are, of course, very influential in the technological development. This way also have the resources and access to lawyers that can actually help them also interpreting the laws for the business purposes. And this we see on the GDPR, for example. So this will also be a sort of a business to follow then the standards that are put out. On the large companies, it's also important that the regulations are done, because as I said, the state is responsible for regulating where fundamental rights may go wrong, and then it's for the companies to apply. Companies often also come up with an ethics guidelines that are useful for them, and they are especially useful to translate what is done. And that brings me to, there was a question previously in the chat and I didn't answer correctly, I realized afterwards. The question was what the people we interviewed said about the regulation. And in fact, many companies, they are currently have all eyes on Brussels. They are sort of, please tell us what to do and how to do that. And here another big discussion is, of course, with the small and medium-sized enterprises that do not have the resources to employ loads of lawyers who help them interpreting the laws. And here it's really to provide a friendly and clear operationalization and guidance on how to do this. And I think, and that's the last sentence, as the AI Act is currently done, coming up with an assessment, documenting what you do, and thinking about potential impact is in general no harm to business. It only helps businesses to really do better products. And this also helps the adoption of AI in the end. Hope that was useful.
Yes, it's really relevant. I think it's the point of small businesses and the difference they have with larger companies. A lot of innovation is happening in very small research-centered entities. We have a lot of good examples here at Sant'Anna with a lot of small companies, startups that are trying to reach the market with some good innovation that comes out typically of a European research. But European research, European funded research is always at quite low TRL, so then bringing real innovation to the market, transposing a prototype developed within a European project, within the framework of European funded research into a final product that is marketed is not simple. And legal barriers are a matter of concern. I'm not saying that this should be a reason to lower the threshold. Actually, that is actually definitely not the case. And all of our research goes along that line of saying that we need to maintain control over the kind of technology we get, but there is for sure a huge problem with respect to smaller, highly innovative enterprises that are not capable of getting to the market, not just because of legal barriers, because legal barriers are not in place yet, but that will be an added layer on top of the existing ones that are the complexity of the market and the complexity of the products that they're trying to develop. So this is definitely a reason for concern, because it would be very counterproductive if European legislation would become something that favors larger corporations over smaller ones in a nearby future. So to some extent, certain things are kind of inevitable, and larger businesses and larger interests are typically more represented than others, but that is kind of part of the task I think the European Union should be tackling in order to reduce these differences. So yeah. Thank you very much again for this comment. I don't know if there are any other questions. We have a few minutes left before lunch. I see there are no more questions from the online audience. I don't know if there's some more from people here. Okay, no more questions. So thank you again, David, for this very interesting presentation, for answering all these numerous questions, and for being here with us today. It's very much a pity that you're not here. Of course, you would be sweating a bit because of the warm weather, but now you would be able to enjoy a nice meal with us. And I hope there will be an occasion in the future to have you physically here in Pisa together with us at our Center of Excellence. So Thank you again, and thank you to all the online audience. Now we will take our lunch break. For those that are involved in the summer school, we will resume today afternoon at 2:30 p.m. online. You should have all the links to be able to connect. So, and for those of you that are here, I invite you to join us for lunch. It's where we had the coffee in the morning. So, thank you again, and hope to see you all soon, some in person and the rest of you online. Thank you.